A real pleasure to welcome Chan Mei Yoke, Associate Professor and Senior Consultant in Paediatric Haematology and Oncology and Paediatric Palliative Care, and the Chair of the Clinical Ethics Committee at KK Hospital. Real pleasure. Great friend of our centre as well. Welcome, Mei Yoke.
I rewrote my whole talk last night, partly because I didn't want to repeat things that have already been said. And so because of that, I kind of forgot. I lose sight of the fact that the theme is about end of life. So some of the things that I said, that I'm going to say, may not directly relate to end of life, but it does try to answer the question there, that in a patient who is incapacitated, who should be making decisions in the patient's best interest? And like a lot of physicians, I love to tell stories, right? We sometimes love to one-up each other, on who has the worst patients, who has the worst kind of experience, kind of like a war story, okay? But that aside, I think stories, patient stories, case studies help clinicians to ground our theory, to relate back to what all these theories are about. I mean, ultimately, we are all not treating, not talking about just theories and all that. We are treating patients, right? So we also want to learn from the cases that we see, okay? So I just want to set the scene to say that this question is only about situations where there's conflict, okay? Not where everybody hunky-dory agrees with each other, then you don't have an issue. But in situations where there's conflict, okay, about the medical care of a person who has lost decisional capacity, whether temporary or permanently, a person who has never had or will never have decisional capacity, or a person who has not yet developed decisional capacity. So I'm a pediatrician, so I mainly deal with the second and the third categories. So let's deep dive into all these stories. So the first story is a 25-year-old young woman who suffered brain damage after a car accident. Okay, it was a dark night. Okay, she was driving along the road and then she lost control of the car. Her car turned turtle a few times. She was thrown out of the car. She landed in a ditch with her face in about a few inches of water. By the time she was found, it was already 15 minutes. Okay, and the emergency people found that she is pulseless. Okay, she had about 15 minutes of not breathing. They managed to bring her back. Unfortunately, she suffered irreversible hypoxic brain damage and was in a persistent vegetative state, okay, requiring tube feeding, but able to breathe on her own. Okay. Her parents, who are very staunch Catholics, wanted to remove the feeding tube because they thought that this, and wanted to let her die in dignity, basically, because they did not want her to exist and suffer, okay, in this state. But the doctors at that time refused because they considered it morally wrong to kill by starvation, because if you take off the tube, obviously she's going to die by starvation, right? So what followed was a protracted 7-year court battle. Okay, it went to and fro, and ultimately the court's problem was that they wanted clear and convincing evidence that this is what the patient would have wanted for herself. They basically wanted a clear and convincing evidence of the patient's wishes and preferences. Okay, otherwise they wanted to err on the side of life. Okay, and of course this case also attracted a lot of opposition from right to life groups. So some of you all may recognize that this is the tragic story of Nancy Cruzan. Okay, and if you see her tombstone, it says that she departed in 1983, but she was only at peace in 1990. So the parents considered that she had already died by the time she was in a persistent vegetative state in 1983, and she was only laid to rest permanently. She was only sort of at peace when she was finally, when the court finally agreed to remove her tube, and she finally died in 1990. Okay, so what can we learn from this case? Actually, this was in the 1980s, and during that time, healthcare was very paternalistic, right? The doctors know best. They're not going to say that, they're not going to give you the choice and say that, do you want this or do you want that? They're going to say, I recommend this treatment, you do it, okay? It's for your own good, your best interest, okay? But at that time when this happened, I think it was in 1980, early 80s, there was already a movement, okay, that patients want to have more self-determination. And this case actually sort of facilitated this Patient Self-Determination Act in the States, where patients are given a choice, competent patients are given a choice to refuse treatment, even if the state treatment can prevent your death, okay, as long as you are determined to be competent. And from that act, all these medical proxy laws, advanced directives are all started coming up. Okay, so now it has shifted from paternalism to more patient-centered care, okay, for somebody who has capacity to decide. Okay, so really the legacy of the Cruzan case was to foster mechanisms to safeguard the interests of people, okay, who become incapacitated at the end of life. So if you wrote something before you become incapacitated, stating what you wish, then this is considered your voice. Okay, it's kind of similar to you telling a doctor when you are still able to of your wishes. Okay, so this really sort of kick-started this whole movement of like advanced directive our AMDA Act, our AMD Act ACP and all that. But despite all that, there are still there's still not enough uptake. Okay, I've heard of people who say, oh, you know, I don't really want to write ACP. My family will know what I want. Okay, but do they really? And even if they do know what you want, they have to convince the people around them that this is what you want. Okay, so this really, you know, one lesson that kind of we can learn from the tragic story of Nancy Cruzan is that if you want your care to be given according to what you want, then you must document it somewhere. Okay, whether it's going to be an AMD or whether it's going to be an ACP. Or even a conversation with your loved ones. But you see, the conversation with your loved ones is very difficult because if it's not documented, who like the courts, if you ever go to the courts, how is the court going to be sure that this is really what you said to your loved ones? So these are the challenges, all right, okay. Whether the surrogate decision-making for somebody who's incompetent should be for the healthcare professional, which is what was in the past, or the family representative, which is what we are trying to sort of go towards. So the healthcare professional has the medical knowledge, right? So we didn't study for 5 years for nothing, I hope. And we can weigh pros and cons better. Okay, we can give alternatives, and we can tell them whether something is going to work, or something we think is going to work, or it doesn't work. Okay. But healthcare professionals also have competing interests, like what JJ was talking about yesterday. We are supposed to be custodians of finite resources. Okay, there's nothing that is, you know, infinite. Okay, there's a certain number of ventilators, there's a certain number of dialysis machines and all that. So, and we have to use it kind of with the best cost effectiveness. Okay, choose the right patients and all that. So we are custodians of finite resources, which may be at odds with the best interest of the patient. Okay. We also have to look at other patients, other people's interests. Okay. Our other patients who may, in our sort of analysis, deserve this resource more than somebody who is, has a poorer prognosis and who is incompetent. Okay. There are also lots of biases. We bring with us a lot of bias, right? We are humans. So like in cases that if you are, you believe very strongly in one treatment, you are going to recommend it, right? Okay. Although we say that, oh, you know, you're supposed to be neutral, it's supposed to be the patient's choice and all that, but we are all humans, and I find that I do that sometimes, right? When I talk to the patients, when I'm trying to convince them of this treatment that I believe very strongly about, there'll be little cues. Okay, I'll be talking longer about this treatment compared to a treatment that I don't believe so much in. Okay, the time that I give will be shorter. My body language might be, my eyes might roll up, that kind of thing. So there are all these little cues that we may not, purposely do it, but it happens. Okay, there are lots of all these cognitive bias that we bring along with us. And plus, we all have our own personal values, right? We believe, whether, our culture or religion, we believe that there are, things that should not happen, okay? Even though this may not be the beliefs of the person that you're trying to be the surrogate decision maker for, invariably we do bring a little bit of ourselves in whatever decisions we make for others, okay? And there have been data showing that doctors either over or underestimate the burdens of the treatment. Okay, a lot of us, especially surgeons, right, say this is a simple surgery, like what is the issue, you know? But to a patient, it's a big thing. Okay, even though the surgery is like, oh no, the chances of failure is very, very minuscule, to them it is a big thing. Okay, but because to a doctor or to a surgeon, you do this day in and day out, you kind of underestimate the impact to a family. Okay. On the other hand, you may also overestimate the burdens of care. Okay, a lot of disability advocacy groups are very concerned that physicians overestimate the burden of a disability. Okay, we always say that, oh, I know this sort of a child with cerebral palsy. What sort of quality of life? Okay, he doesn't know his family. Okay, he doesn't go to school. He cannot enjoy his food. This is poor quality of life, okay? But to a family, the child who may not speak, but smiles when he listens to music, smiles when the mother comes and touches her hand, to them, this may be good quality of life, okay? So all this over and underestimating of burdens does impact on our decision making for somebody who's incompetent. What about the family representative, okay? Presumably, because they are in the same family, right? They are supposed to know the patient's values, views, and preferences best. Okay, it may not always be true, but probably better than the doctor, right? But the family also has competing interests. What about the interests of the family unit itself? Okay, if you have a family of say 4 kids, one of whom has a lot of care issues, okay, and is incompetent. The other 3 are okay, and they also require care. Okay. But in a sense, for the family, they have to kind of gauge, right? If there's a certain amount of cost issue, who should you give that cost to? To somebody who is not able to achieve all the goals that you want for your children, or the other 3 who is going to, have a lot of sort of things that they're going to do as they grow up. So they also have to look at the whole family as a whole. And no matter what we say, finance always comes in. I know we all say, oh, ethics, you're not supposed to bring in finance. But the reality is, we do, okay? Whether we want to or not, we do. And the families also have to look at that as well, especially in very expensive Singapore, right? And there's also evidence to suggest that family members use their own values and belief systems rather than what they believe the patient to have. Okay, so again, kind of similar to the physicians, right? So, story 2. Okay, this is the 13-year-old girl who had complex pharyngeal surgery for obstructive sleep apnea, but unfortunately suffered post-operative massive hemorrhage, okay, leading to cardiac arrest and hypoxic brain damage. Okay, tests done, which include EEG and all the brainstem testing, confirmed brain death. But the family disputed the diagnosis and launched a legal challenge. And again, protracted many years. The court got another outsider to do a second brainstem test and confirm brainstem death and declared the girl legally dead. Okay, so usually what happens in most hospitals now, that when brain death is confirmed, we usually give a few days for the family to, sort of come to terms and all that, and then usually treatment will be withdrawn, right? So this one, the death certificate was issued, but then the family refused to accept the diagnosis of death, okay? And then after a sort of a whole protracted court challenges and all that, the court agreed that this girl is dead, okay? But they came to a sort of an agreement to discharge the girl to the family. And the family then transferred this child to a hospital in New Jersey, where religious objection to brain death is recognized. Okay, so that means they recognize that if you say that this patient is not dead because your religious belief doesn't have this concept of brain death, then they will take it and they will continue life-prolonging treatments. She actually lived for another 5 years, okay, during which time she grew up, okay? She underwent puberty, she started having menses, okay? So it's kind of like, she had a death cert issued, she's supposed to be dead. And in fact, when the child was transferred to New Jersey, there were a lot of talk and saying, you're actually looking after a dead body. She's going to rot soon. Okay, but instead of rotting, she actually lived for another 5 years. She grew up, she went into puberty, and she had Minaki. Okay, so has she actually died or not? She finally did die, okay, of liver failure and bleeding, and was issued a second death certificate. So this must be the only person in the world that died twice, okay, had two death certificates. So some of you may recognize this, the tragic story of Jahi McMath, okay? And what is the lessons that we can learn from this? So there is a lot of sub-story. As you can see from the earlier picture, they are African Americans, right? And there's been a lot of systemic biases against African American in the US system. They have a lot of previous injustices done to them, and there's a lot of distrust that African Americans have with the health system in the US. And in fact, the family was talking about how, if she had been a little white girl, they probably would have tried their best. Okay? And actually what happened during the whole process, when she came out from surgery, she actually started to have some bleeding. She was coughing up blood and all that, and the mother tried to get help. Okay, but this is her side of story. She was saying that nobody came, and people brushed her off and said, this is usual. She had surgery, of course she's going to bleed, so don't make such a mountain out of a molehill. So it's only when it was catastrophic and she went into cardiac arrest that people started coming together and all that. So there was this perception that nobody was listening to them, okay? And that when the doctors spoke to the family, the perception was that he thought that they were like dirt, okay, because they're African American, they are poor, and they don't understand and all that. And finally, one of the sort of telling statement was the mother said, if the hospital were more compassionate, would we have fought so hard? Okay, because they really went to town with all these legal challenges and all that. So really, race, culture, and religion perspectives does play an important role, okay, in all our decision making. Now, communication. So sensitive, empathetic communication is so important, okay, and that really helps us sort of pave the way to make surrogate decision making in difficult situations like this, okay. And finally, good ethics require good facts. Okay, you must agree on certain facts, right? So if people don't agree that the child has died, then what are we talking about ethics? Whether withdraw or don't withdraw. They don't even agree on the fact whether the child has died or not. A lot of us in our past we know, right? Okay, if you die means you stop breathing, you turn blue, you are cold, and then tomorrow you start rotting. Okay, then you know you are dead, right? So why is it so complicated now? Why is death so difficult to diagnose now? Okay, it really started because our technology now is getting better, right? In 1959, when we had the first kind of mechanical ventilation, we can actually help to breathe for the patient. So this thing about the patient not breathing means that the patient is dead is taken away. Okay, the patient can breathe can breathe because the machine is breathing for you. Okay, so you can't tell that the patient is cold. Okay, you can't tell that the patient is not breathing because the machine is breathing for you. So because of all these, you have all these patients that were kept alive in all these wards in a limbo. Okay, they are breathing, but we don't know whether they are there or not. They certainly don't respond to you, they don't talk to you, they don't look at you and all that. And so that's why in I think it was 68 or something like that, Harvard Medical School convened a group of experts and all that, where they came up with this kind of new definition of death as brain death. Okay, so basically they're saying that there are sort of two ways you can tell whether somebody is dead. When the heart stops, okay, so this is cardiovascular death, or when the brain loses its function, which is brain death. Okay, and then there are all these tests to see whether the brain has lost its function. So that's why this thing about brain death, determination of death has come about. And in Singapore, we follow it. We follow the brain death definition of death. Okay, and this is also helpful for us later on because it helped us. Okay, sounds very bad. It helped us have more organs for transplant. Okay, because of brain death. Okay, we can keep the body alive even though we think that technically the person has died, so that we have time to take viable organs for patients who need them. Okay, I'm trying to choose my words very carefully here. So brain death does have its uses, but it also has difficulties. Okay, it comes to all these. Okay, if you say that somebody is brain dead, how can that child live for 5 years, menstruate, and go into puberty? All this is the brain function, right? So obviously the brain did not all die. Okay, there is some part of the brain that's functioning. The opposite, the pituitary and the hypothalamus is still functioning. So then does that mean that the patient has not died? Okay, so it's very difficult. But you see, I think the problem also is when you get courts to decide, the law tends to like to have a black and white kind of line. Okay, there's a line over which you are alive, under which you are dead. Okay, but biology is not like that. Okay, biology is very nuanced. You know, medicine, we are not machines, right? We have like a spectrum. This is death, this is alive. In between, there's a lot of gray kind of distinctions. It's also kind of like the same way we determine who is an adult and who is a minor. Okay, I get that a lot because I'm a pediatrician, right? If you're an adult, you are able to make decisions on your own. Okay, and adult varies in different countries. In our country, age of majority is above 21 years old. In the UK, it is above 18. Okay, so then if you are, say, 17 years and 300 and whatever days, 63 days, what's the difference between you in mental capacity and when the next day when you are 18 years old? You don't suddenly jump on to become an adult, right? So there's always a kind of like a graduation. So brain is like that. Okay, you have an uninjured brain, okay? On the other hand, you have a dead brain that's necrotic and liquefied. In between, you have a lot of gray kind of areas. And while the law likes to have that black line, in reality, it doesn't work like that. So Jahi McMath was probably sort of like a little bit above the black line. Then when she started, she was probably a little bit below that black line. And then later on, when she kind of recovered a little bit, she was a little bit above that black line. So how do you determine, whether she died or not? So does that mean that we, throw this thing about brain death out the window? No, not really. I think the crucial thing is that eventually she did die, right? Because we know that she's not going to recover her brain function, okay? And all this, hopefully would have been prevented if there's better communication, if the healthcare team are more aware of the way that they treat patients, whether they are subconsciously biased towards them because of the fact that they are minorities and all that. And a lot of Singaporeans say, oh, no, it doesn't happen here. We treat everybody the same. We are multiracial, we have we treat everybody equal. Do we really? I mean, look at our migrant population. Okay, what happened to them during COVID? They were not allowed, they were kept in the dorms and they were not allowed out. We were allowed out at certain times, with restrictions. They were not allowed out at all. Okay? They were in crowded places and when they are in our healthcare system, if you cannot pay, I send you home. Okay, so there is, a certain amount of bias that we have towards our minority population. Okay, so the court as a surrogate decision maker is supposed to be impartial, right? But because they're impartial, are they also impersonal? They don't really know the patient. They are not medical experts. Neither are they personal experts. They still rely on the doctors to give them the facts, and they still rely on the patient to tell the patient's family to tell them their side of the story. Okay, and going to court is intrinsically adversarial. You have a winner and you have a loser. Okay, you don't really have an in between. Okay, and so that strains the relationship between the healthcare professional, the patient, the family. Okay, and don't forget, after the court has given this decision, we are still left holding the baby. We still have to look after the patient. Okay, with all this strained relationship. Okay, and it is very expensive, very time-consuming. It takes years before you have an answer, and meanwhile, you have to sustain, the life of the patient for which you are trying to make a decision. Okay, and especially if you work in jurisdictions that uses jury, the outcome can be very unpredictable. Okay, if you, on some certain jurisdiction, it relies on precedents. So if there's no precedents, then, sometimes it's often very difficult. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's often very difficult for the court to change tack when there's no precedents, I think. And sometimes whatever they decide can be kind of vague, in the end. So not really a very good choice. So the third story, this is an infant boy who was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that causes progressive brain damage and muscle failure and has no known cure. Okay? His doctors actually contacted an overseas scientist with an experimental treatment, and an agreement was made to bring the scientist over to have a trial of period on this child. Unfortunately, the baby deteriorated before treatment could be given, and now his doctors think that treatment would be futile, okay, and recommended withdrawal. So I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about. Okay, but anyway. So parents wanted to try anyway, and they raised funds, okay, to bring him overseas to have the experimental treatment, and the scientists agreed, okay? But his doctors disagreed, and the courts were involved, okay? There's a lot of intense media attention, a lot of public opinion. The Pope and a certain world leader gave their opinions. The staff in hospital was harassed. Finally, the court agreed with the doctors, and withdrawal was ordered. And I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about. This is Charlie Gard, the tragic story of Charlie Gard, okay, where a lot of people who don't really, know what they're talking about gave a lot of input. The Pope actually gave Charlie a Vatican passport, I think, to ask him to come to Italy. You'll be looked after in Italy. Our certain world leader, who I hope is not going to become the world leader again, put in his 2 cents worth and say, come to America, we will save you, we will help you, and all that. And the poor staff, okay, and this is what I was talking about, right? The court can say, do this, do that, and all that. And who is doing it is the staff, right? The medical staff. And with all this intense media attention, the medical staff are the ones that bear the brunt of all this, and like what Lalit and Hanyi were saying, all this moral distress and burnout is partly contributed by these kind of situations. Okay, so I will set aside the lesson learned later, because I'll talk about this fourth story, which is technically not a end of life. Okay, so this is a 16-year-old boy who was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma, okay, which is a highly curable cancer, and was recommended treatment at that time with chemotherapy, radiation, and splenectomy. After 2 months of chemotherapy, during which he experienced the usual kind of common treatment-related toxicities, which this is one of the things that I sometimes try to remind myself when I tell them, you vomit, you lose your hair, and all that. And to me, it's not really a big deal, because I see them all the time, right? They vomit, they lose their hair, but after that they'll get better, okay? But to a patient, it is a big deal, okay? I'm not the one that's losing the hair or vomiting, they are the ones. And so it's a bit kind of naive of me to say that, to say that, this toxicity is really not a big deal. And so he experienced common treatment-related toxicities. Because he wanted to stop the treatment, but the parents refused, the doctors refused, he ran away from home, okay? And he only returned home when his parents promised over the media to respect his wishes. He told me, come home. If you come home, I promise I won't force you to have chemo. So only when the parents said that he came home, and there was a lot of outpouring of public support. Again, a lot of intense media attention. And this is the story of Billy Bess. Like I think what Dr. Marcus was saying, I don't want to tell you, that all stories are always so doom and gloom and all that. We do have some happy, hopeful stories sometimes, and this is one of them. Billy Bess is one of them. So the top is what he wrote to his parents. Okay, he was saying, he actually never wanted chemo right from the very beginning, but nobody listened to him. Okay, and he suffered through 2 months. To him, it's like, it's them suffering. This poor quality of life to him. Okay, and so he wants to run away, and he probably has some insight that if he didn't have treatment, he's going to die, that. And so that's why he said, I'm in God's hands now, I'm very sorry, I love you very much, I'm in God's hands, and he ran away, okay. Obviously, the fact that I have this picture, oops, what did I do? Sorry. The fact that I have this picture, you know that he survived lah. He even have a kid, you know. And he wrote a story. Because after he came back, his parents said, you know, if they could, they would want him to carry on chemotherapy. But they're afraid that he's going to run away again. So they acquiesced lah, okay. They followed what he wanted. He had diet lah. He probably had all sorts of, you know, alternative medications and all that, and he survived, okay. So then, what lessons do we learn? Like, pediatric ethics is very difficult, okay. Adolescents are worse, okay. So how do you and Kumu will talk about this later. You know, how do you incorporate the voice of somebody who is, in the eyes of the law, has not achieved competence yet? This is the part where they are developing competence, but in the eyes of the law, not yet. Okay, so adults are protected by Mental Capacity Act, your Advanced Medical Directive Act, but children are protected by the Children and Young Persons Act. Okay, and parents are responsible for children, right? And the parental rights and responsibilities occur naturally. It's not the court say, you know, that you are the parent, now you're responsible. It's a natural thing, right? And although the law usually don't interfere with the parents' decisions, okay, but when the child is put at unacceptable risk of harm, then the court should and will step in, okay, especially if the child's best interests are not served. So therefore, parental autonomy is not absolute. Okay, so how do we make decisions for children then? Okay, if you have no decisional capacity, and this is like the child, like, you know, Charlie got, there's no decisional capacity at all, has not and will not attain decisional capacity, then it's usually parents or those with parental responsibility. If the child is developing capacity, then usually the parents, together with the child's agreement, this is what's called assent. Okay, if there is already decisional capacity, like Billy Best, okay, really the child should be the one making the decision, whether or not the parents agree. Okay, but bear in mind, in Singapore, there's no law that defines the legal age to give consent for medical treatment. Unlike things like driving, you have to be above 18 to drive. Unlike alcohol and cigarettes, I think also above 18, right? Alcohol and cigarettes, and even having sex, above 16 you can have sex. Okay, but the law doesn't tell you how old you have to be before you can make decisions for yourself medically, okay? So in children, therefore, we kind of have various ways to try and help us. One is the best interest standard, but we know how difficult best interest standard is, like you can heard from previous talks. And best interest standard kind of implies that there's only one best way, when usually, one best objective way, but usually in reality that's not true, right? So the KEMA has come up with a harm principle where the bar is lower, okay? Only when you think that the child is at imminent danger of severe and preventable harm, then should the court step in, okay? Or you have another way that we look at, which is called the zone of parental discretion, which is illustrated very nicely here, okay? The child's best interest in the center. You have the whole grey zone where, it's not the best treatment, but it's actually good enough lah. Okay, it's not too bad. Okay, and then of course you have, like, you know, very severe harm, in which case beyond that the court should step in. Okay, and there are lots of all these things that we do, right? Okay, like, this antibiotic is not good enough, you know, not as good, but not so bad lah. Okay, so and we accept that. So this is the zone of parental discretion. And then constrained parental autonomy is kind of similar to the zone of parental discretion, just that the parents are allowed to raise the child according to their own family values, except when it impacts on the child's risk of harm. Okay, so it's kind of similar. So another lesson that's learned from these two cases of Charlie Gard and Billy Best is that nowadays with social media the media the internet we really have a lot of things like trial by media, okay? Like what happened to Great Ormond Street and Charlie Gard. You know, the public has already determined guilt, okay? So public opinion is now the third or the fourth voice now on surrogate decision making, when they really should not be. Okay, so we have to be aware that all these can foster and magnify the distrust between the healthcare professionals and the parents and the family. So what about in Singapore? Do we have all these things in Singapore? Fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate. We don't have so many of these cases. So why is that? Is it because our Singaporean parents are so obedient? I don't think so. Partly, I think because either they are not raised to the court, which may be good, right? Okay, maybe because it was all settled at the ground level. Okay, there was compromise, there was a lot of discussion and compromise, or maybe physicians just kind of, are paternalistic and don't even allow families to make that decision. I don't know, but we do have some cases. This is a case in our hospital many years ago, where the parents refused treatment for their child with very treatable acute leukemia because they wanted to bring the child to America to breathe fresh air, look at green grass, run around in the field, and they believe that that will cure his leukemia. So in cases like this is quite kind of obvious, especially since the leukemia cure rate nowadays is in excess of 90%. Okay, so it's very easy in that sense for the court to say that what are you talking about? You have to treat this child. Okay. And so the child was unfortunately also for this child, the parents eventually split up because it was the mum who is very firm in the belief, whereas the father is not. We also have this case where, in the past, we always talk about how Gilead competence is not been proven, not been affirmed in Singapore. Gilead competence is a term used in medical law to decide whether a child who's 16 years and below is able to make medical decisions without the parents' agreement. Okay, so this girl, I think you all would know the case, wanted COVID vaccination. The father also agreed, but the mother disagreed. Okay, and the mother said that you cannot have COVID vaccination without the mother's permission. Okay, because although the parents are split up, they have joint custody. But the court allowed for that, and so to some people, this constitutes affirmation of Gilead competence. So what's so difficult? What's all this? Balancing and all that. What's in the balance? The medical considerations we all know about. The other considerations, the patient's wishes, values, specific characteristics or virtues. And we need to recognize, for the healthcare professionals, empathy for the patient and the family situation. To really be aware that sometimes, because of the fact that we see all these cases all the time, we don't appreciate the impact it has on the family. And to have humility and self-reflection, to not impose your own values. Okay, so basically the answer to the question, okay, it's really shared collaborative decision maker. Of course, you're going to have like one person who makes a decision, but you want it to be a shared collaborative decision making. But of course, this is ideal, right? And we know real life, it cannot always happen. Instead of the heart above, sometimes instead of the heart down there, you might get skull and crossbones. Okay, so in cases of intractable conflict, okay, the first thing we should do really is to establish what is the disagreement about. Is it a disagreement about facts? In which case, you try and address the lack of agreement, whether more facts are needed, get second opinion, second independent medical opinion. Or is this a disagreement about values? In which case, often it's very difficult to kind of say, this is a wrong value. There's no such thing as wrong value. This is just your values, right? So sometimes you may need viewpoints from religious or community leaders, okay? You may need help from the clinical ethics, your friendly clinical ethics committee members. And there has been a push lately to consider mediation more than litigation because mediation is less antagonistic. It tries to find common ground rather than, have one winner and one loser. Okay, the idea is to have everybody a winner. Okay, so finally, I love the analogy of Prof. Huxtable about all this thing, the orchestra, the best interest being orchestra and all that, and how the conductor is the one that is the surrogate decision maker, but he cannot do the thing on his own, right? I mean, he can stand there and do like that. If the musicians don't play, you're not going to have a concert, right? So you need your other concert members, the orchestra members. You need your choir, and so I mean, I was trying to think how to sort of expand the idea a bit further. So to me, the patient would be the soloist. Okay, the whole concert is about the soloist, right? Everybody's supporting the soloist, trying to make the soloist have his nice concert line. What if the soloist becomes incapacitated? Okay, what are we going to do? Are you going to cancel the whole concert? Okay, in which case, just unplug the patient? Or are you going to have some sort of, or maybe postpone it, maybe next week, or you know? So basically it is difficult, but together we can make things hopefully easier. Okay. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for your attention.